Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co, and today I'm reviewing Wizards of the Grimoire and its expansion, Shifting Sands. Wizards of the Grimoire is a two-player head-to-head game in which players are trying to reduce their opponent's life total from 60 down to 0. The base game over here is a final retail game. The expansion is a prototype, so rules and components subject to change, and I'll have a link to the crowdfunding campaign down below. Now, important disclaimer before we dive into this, please note that we did do, over here on Board Game Co, we did do paid content. We did a paid preview on the Wizards of the Grimoire base game. Devin did a paid preview a while ago, but since that video, I've had the opportunity to play the game on Board Game Arena, and so when I heard they were doing an expansion, I've enjoyed this one enough that I specifically reached out and asked them if I can cover the expansion because I've been enjoying this game. But obviously, we did paid content on the game, please take that into account. On the base game, please take that into account. But with that, this, like I said already, is a two-player head-to-head experience. Oh, and this, in case it wasn't clear, this is not paid at all. This is me just being interested in the game because I've enjoyed and liked the game. But with that, Wizards of the Grimoire is a two-player head-to-head game. I'm going to teach you how the base game works. I'm going to move fairly fast in that, though, and then I'll talk about the expansion, which frankly adds variety above all else. There's some few tweaks and adjustments, additional things, but most of the expansion just adds more cards to the experience. But Wizards of the Grimoire is a game which you're trying to reduce your opponent's life total from 60 down to 0. You're going to use little card trackers over here where you can track your life total as you move it down, and the general game involves you drafting spells and then activating those spells using a chunk of mana, so while you slowly try to figure out the best combination of cards that will help you eliminate your opponent's life total. And to that end, you start the game with these 10 cards over here. You're going to have a player go ahead and draft a spell. Let's not spend too much time on it. Let's pretend I go ahead and draft this spell over here. We replace it, and now it's the next player's turn to draft a spell. They'll go ahead and draft this utility spell over here, or this regeneration spell, I should say. Let's put that into play on their board over here, and they'll go ahead and pick another spell. And then we'll go ahead and have you pick another spell. This time we'll go ahead and pick this second life spell. I'm not even looking into it at all. I'm giving this no time or thought the way I typically would, because I'm focusing on showing you how the game works. Over here we have one of the new cards. In fact, everything you see here is a new card. I'm specifically only playing with the new cards right now. That is a one-time use card, which is a specific type of card, and that symbology is prototype. We're going to see something, different when the final game. Now that we have two spells over here and one spell over here, this player is going to start the game. So they have one spell, but they'll start the game, and they'll start this game by drafting a new spell. You see, every single turn in the game, you're going to draft a spell until you have 6 spells, at which point there's still ways to continuously mix up your spells that you have in front of you, but we'll talk about that shortly. But you're going to go ahead and draft a spell as your starting turn. So over here, they will again look at the board, but now this is part of their turn. This is now what you're going to do on every single turn. And let's pretend they go ahead and take, I don't know, let's take Bloodthirst over here. And again, I'm not spending time trying to think through the best combos over here, because that, frankly, would take more time, and I want to go ahead and just teach you how to play the game. Then, once they've done that, they will then take any mana off their spells, if there was any mana, and then draw 3 mana. That's the cycle. So we're going to go through a few turns here, just so you can get a sense of how this operates. I'll really just focus on one player, because that's all you really need to know. I went ahead and I drew manas of 1, 1, and 2, and the manas come in range 1, 2, 3, 4. There's a lot of 1s, a bunch of 2s, less 3s, and only a handful of 4s. You're going to use this mana to power up your spells. So for example, I'm going to use these 3 mana over here, and I'm going to power up, I'm going to place them face down in whatever order I want to, on top of the spell over here, and that's going to power Concentration, which has gained 5 mana. You may choose to gain less mana. The next spell you cast this turn costs 1 less mana for each mana you chose not to gain. So I will choose to gain 4. It's actually a really cool card, by the way, just for the record. I don't think I've played with that one yet. But I'm going to go ahead and draw 4 mana instead of 5, which means this spell over here will only cost 1 mana. Which is great, because now I will go ahead and cast it for 0 mana, which means I'll be able to cast it twice. And this card says, each time you discard off the spell, deal 3... never mind, that didn't actually help. I'm going to go ahead and draft 5 mana, because I realize now that that's not a good combination. This is where it helps to read the cards before you do things. Either way, I'm going to go ahead and play that full spell properly. So I'm going to play a spell over here. I'm going to play this mana down over here. And that's going to be each time you discard off the spell, deal 3 damage minus the highest power mana in your hand. And then the last thing you do on your turn, so I've played my spells, I've done my thing, and now the last thing you can do on your turn is you go ahead and cast any one card as basic damage. I'm lucky enough to have a 4, so I'm going to go to a basic attack of 4, and my opponent's going to reduce his life total from 60 down to 56 over here. That's going to be a standard turn in Wizards of the Grimoire. Now over here, we're not going to heavily focus on that person's turn because it won't help you. Let's just pretend they just go ahead and do a bunch of things. They cast some spells, they do some damage. Ignore what's actually happening here. We're just going to go ahead and pretend that they went ahead and did something. They got 3 cards. I reduced my health total. Let's not focus too much time on it. back to my turn, and we go through another turn sequence where I'm going to once again draft a new spell. So this player would have again gone ahead and drafted a spell, they've added it to their pool, a new one comes out, and now I can go ahead and choose another spell over here. And let's say I go ahead and, I don't know, let's say I can do a swap power cards around, choose one, discard a mana, pick a mana card off your other spells, deal 2 damage. There's a lot of utility spells. I don't want to heavily focus on this. We're going to go ahead and just go ahead and take Shadow Oath over here. So we take Shadow Oath over here, put it down in front of me, and let's go ahead and once again draw 3 mana from the deck over here, because you do that every single turn. I now have this hand over here, which includes some 3s over here. But then the important part is I actually reduce the mana on the existing spells. You take 1 mana off every existing spell over here, which effectively is their countdown clock to when they can be cast again. So right now Concentration still can't be cast, but Bloodthirst can, and more specifically, Bloodthirst is each time you discard off the spell, deal 3 damage minus the highest power mana in your hand, which is actually bad because my highest power was 3. That's also a sequence where the sequence matters. You're supposed to reduce mana first, then you draw new cards. So Bloodthirst unfortunately did nothing because I had high-powered mana in my hand. So, that wasn't great. Again, pick the cards, play according to them, not just teaching the game. But either way, let's go ahead and try to figure out what we can do over here. Let's go ahead and play this Bloodthirst over here, like so. We're going to play that down over here, which will hopefully help for next turn. I'm going to go ahead and play a card down here, pick up a mana card off one of your other spells. Your opponent gains 1 mana. So I'm going to pick up this mana over here. My opponent will go ahead and gain a mana. And then I'll go ahead and launch this as a basic attack against them for another 3, bringing them down from 56 down to 53. That's my second turn of the game, and now again it's their turn. They'll do their thing, they'll go ahead and draw a card, they'll do their whole turn, again, pretend they did some damage to me and all that. I'm just focusing on one play so you get a sense of things. And then back to this turn, we will again draw another card. Let's figure out what we can do over here. Let's go ahead and take a... that is useful-ish. Let's go ahead and take Belch over here. We're going to go ahead and take Belch, which could be an interesting combination spell. Belch costs 5, and we're going to see how this plays out over here. We're going to go ahead and put a new spell out over here. And let's take this one last turn before proceeding into what the expansion adds, reviews, all that stuff. So, I take this card. These all come off over here. But when this comes off, deal 3 damage minus the highest power mana on your hand. Highest power mana in my hand is 1, so I do 2 damage to them, knocking down 53 down to 51. And then I can go ahead and do a bunch of these spells, and let's go ahead and do the following. I'm going to start by placing a card down on Shadow Oath. Pick up a mana card off one of your other spells. Your opponent gains 1 mana. Maybe I shouldn't have done that yet. Maybe let's go ahead and start with... you know what? No, I'm going to go ahead and do this. I don't know why. We're going to go ahead and do this. Each time you discard off this spell, it's not the same. Okay, we're going to go ahead and play Shadow Oath, which will cost 1. We'll go ahead and place... you know what? We're not going to play Shadow. We're going to go ahead and play Concentration. So we're going to play 3 cards down on Concentration over here. We're going to gain 5 mana, but then this spell costs 1 less for each consecutive regeneration or utility spell cast before this spell. So I'm going to choose to only gain 1 mana on this spell over here. That will make this spell cost 4 less, and with that 4 less, I'm going to go ahead and be able to play nothing on it and deal 4 damage straight to my opponent's head from 51 to 47 over here. There we go. Just knocked him down a bit. And now this could, in theory, be cast again, or at least more specifically in theory if I actually had enough mana. But let's see if I can. I don't think I can, but let's see what happens. Let's go ahead and play Shadow Oath over here. Pick a mana card of your other spells. Your opponent gains a mana, so he's going to gain a mana over here. And let's go ahead and do Bloodthirst over here. Each time you discard a mana off the spell, deal damage minus the highest power cost in your hand. And that's basically how this plays out over here. I actually don't think I drew my 3 mana this turn, but that's neither here nor there. That's basically what you're going to be doing in Wizards of the Grimoire. On your turn, you're going to go ahead and draft a new spell. Then you're going to go ahead and pull mana off your spells, clearing up your spells to be able to recast. Then you're going to go ahead and draw 3 mana, and then you'll use the combination of your abilities to gather mana, to manipulate your opponent's cards, to manipulate your own cards, and to deal damage ultimately to your opponent as efficiently as possible. You are only allowed to have 6 spells in front of you, which means once you do have 6 spells, you have the opportunity to replace spells with a caveat. You can't replace a spell that currently has mana on it, and you can only replace a spell before mana goes off, effectively meaning you kind of have to not cast a spell or use an ability in order to be able to replace a spell. But if you do so, you have that flexibility to be able to continuously iterate and develop your cards around what's happening. And that's basically what you do. You go back and forth until your opponent is reduced down to 0 health, at which point you win the game. Which brings us to a review starting off, well, I don't even know what to start off with this one, because this is both the base game and the expansion, of which I've played, well, the base game many, many times, the expansion only a handful of times. But Wizards of the Grimoire was a game that wasn't really heavily on my radar. it was a game that I heard about it, and they reached out, they did preview content on the channel, and Devin did preview content. I never played the game, so all I knew is Devin liked the game. And then I heard other people talking about how they liked the game. And so I started looking into it, and then it was on Board Game Arena. And so when I was on Board Game Arena, I decided to check this one out. And I started playing it. And I really enjoyed the sheer amount of combos going on in this game. Every single card has little manipulations that it does, little amounts of mana that cost, ways that it operates. There's going to be spells that give you mana, there's going to be spells that deal damage to your opponent, and spells that mess with the entire fabric of everything else that you're doing. And the way you can combine things is so satisfying. You will find so many clever ways to mix that into this, into that, into this, and that's where you have the base game has this entire deck of just completely unique cards that all mix together beautifully in different subtle ways that just give you the sense of power, the sense of manipulation, the sense of look at that cool fun thing that I did. And the expansion, all it really does is more of the same. There are a few new things, a few new concepts, you know, those one-time use spells that pop away. There's gonna be some other small details, but for the most part, the expansion just gives you more cards. In case you were enjoying this game, if you wanted more variety, introduces again a whole new deck of more completely unique cards to add into the mix. And so I think for me, the rating on this is interesting, because like, I mean, I'll talk about the things I like, things I don't like, and all that, but just before we do that, the base game and the expansion to me are ultimately the same. The expansion is more of a good thing, but it doesn't really change anything. If you didn't like Wizards of the Grimoire before, this isn't going to change your mind. And it's also not essential in the sense that I think you could play Wizards of the Grimoire, have a great time, and not need the expansion. The expansion is just more in case you like that more variety. But past that, the game ultimately is just a game about combos. It's a sheer amount of combos going on that are so rewarding, and you have to both be mindful of your own combos while reacting to what your opponent is doing. Pay attention to the cards they're drafting. Pay attention to the cards that they're using to build their engine, because there are often, at any given time, there's often going to be cards in the spell row that will give you the opportunity to learn how to mess with them, or even just deny them. If there's cards that will help them to build out their engine, taking those cards for yourself can be still useful for yourself while denying them cards that otherwise are there. And I think overall the sheer combo-tastic goodness of the game is what pulls me in here. And I like some of the things it does that are interesting or different. That mana aspect, the way they have mana as a timer and a cost in the game, gives you a lot of room to play with things on the spells you have in play. And so it's just it's a simple head-to-head deal damage to each other game, just with incredibly clever combos and a new system that I haven't seen before that works well and gives you a lot of room to play with things as you try to figure out how to just build intricate and interesting systems. One of my favorite combos I have had in this game was a card that says deal 1 damage, but deal an additional damage for each time this spell was cast. Which means you need other cards to be able to cast it again, because you can't cast a card on its own multiple times. But I've staggered that with one card that gave me a bunch of mana, and 4 cards let me just consistently recast it by taking mana off it, which meant I was consistently able to cast that spell for 4 or 5 times a turn, dealing chunks of damage to my opponent, just rattling off again and again. 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5, just dealing 15 damage to their head every single turn is incredibly satisfying. And that's not by any means the only combo I've had in this game. There's just so many ways to combo things in rewarding ways as you go through this. As far as things I don't like in the game, not really that much. I wish the production and art were a little bit more popped, I guess. I think the art is actually fine as is. I think the graphic design could use a slight touch-up. It's good. It's totally fine as is. But I don't know. I think I've seen games that looked more polished that were significantly worse. This looks a little less polished, but is a very, very good game. So small critique on that. I think more so, and more importantly than that, though, is it can be hard to come back from a losing game. If your opponent is currently stomping into the ground, that's unlikely to change. If you have a well-matched game, you know, you can get a little better, a little worse, all that, sure. But if your opponent is currently trashing you, there's not much that's going to come back, and so it does have that. There's no catch-up mechanic, which I'm fine with. The game is fast enough and short enough that doesn't necessarily need it. But if you are getting trounced in the early game, you're just going to have to either fold and call it quits, or play it out slowly but painfully as you go through it. As far as I can see others not liking, I don't have any strong senses of what it is. I mean, if this isn't your genre, 2-player head-to-head games, that's obviously a factor. Past that, I can't speak at all to the sense of balance. I can't speak to whether some cards are more or less powerful than others. I don't know the math behind it. I know that some cards call to me and other cards don't. I have no idea if there's that one particularly powerful card that's just really game breaking, and everyone knows. I just don't know any of that, so I can't speak to the sense of balance in the game. game. As far as final thoughts on Wizards of the Grimoire, this was a game that I passed on uncovering multiple times. It just didn't call my name. I think card games in general, head-to-head dueling card games, I think they're a dime a dozen. I think they are so easy to create, relatively speaking, compared to what you have to put, the work you have to put into a full-on board game versus a card-based system where there's just a bunch of powers and abilities on cards and that's all it is. I tend to be a bit more dismissive of card games until I hear that they're good, just because there are so many of them. And that's a reaction that I had to Wizards of the Grimoire when it first came out, until I kept on hearing from person after person after person how good the experience was, until I played it myself and was like, I really like this. If you are someone who's a Magic the Gathering player, if you like that card comboing, if you like any sense of just trying to figure out the most efficient way to take down your opponent with a handful of cards, Wizards of the Grimoire is an incredibly well done system that has consistently impressed me. And the card variety, the fact that in any given game, you're usually going to have at least 5 spells in play before you hit the end game. Almost always you'll have 6. And then occasionally you'll have like a 7th or 8th spell that you're proxying in. But that means in a full game, in a long game where you're seeing a lot, you'll have 8 spells that you're playing with. In a giant deck full of spells, with your opponent having a deck full of spells, with the expansion adding tons of spells, which means the sheer variety of the ways you can mix things together is just off the charts. For me, this is a 4.5 out of 5. It is a really, really, really well done head-to-head system that I think will scratch the itch for any card-playing, mage battling personality out there. A strong game. I really appreciate this one. As far as other game recommendations, first of all, if you're looking for a game that's going to give you another head-to-head game that I was also dismissive of when it first came out, but have also come around on very heavily, Radlands from Roxley Games will also give you another head-to-head system with a shared deck and an interesting base mechanism that's very intriguing and gives you a lot of things to build around as you ultimately try to outplay and outwit your opponent. Another strong game. If you like this one, I think you'll like that one, and vice versa. They both have fantastic gameplay to them. And if you're looking for a game that's very similar in the sense of the way you manipulate things in the game while being much less head-to-head and damage and all that, Res Arcana is a game that's going to have a lot of comboing as well, as you also try to draft various things and try to utilize different combinations in order to be able to gather the resources you need more efficiently than the other players. In any case, and until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. I hope you enjoyed this video, and as always, I hope you have a good one.